Hello, welcome or welcome back to Sapling Tarot. My name is Imogen. Today I'm going to be doing a VR to Tarot Magpie's deck vibe check and Crescent Dreams Tarot's anti-vibe check videos. Hi, editing Imogen here. I just realised I didn't explain what this tag was. So if you haven't already seen Sylvie's video or Libby's video, this is talking about the cards that I check when I'm looking to maybe purchase a new tarot deck. It's the cards that I look at first to see if I can suss out the vibe and see if it's the right deck for me. There can still be decks that have a rogue card in the mix that will make me turn off on a deck, but these are the main ones. So yeah, just that's the information. Oh yeah, and the anti-vibe check is things that I desperately don't want to see in a deck and that will immediately turn me off. So that's what we're doing today. I couldn't work out how to do a VR to just one of them without inadvertently doing the other one as well. So this is going to be the cards I judge a deck by, and also a little scattering of things that I really don't want in my tarot imagery. So yeah, so it's what I want, what I don't want, and I couldn't figure out how to do one without the other. Okay, so the first card is a continuation of my recent series of Imogen Has Beef with the Wheel of Fortune. I'm sure this has been mentioned in other videos, but so many depictions of the Wheel of Fortune leave so much to be desired. And it's a really hard thing to depict. When I've done tarot art and stuff and I've thought about drawing the Wheel of Fortune, I've always come unstuck with, well, how do you draw that? How do you conjure up an image that conveys that sort of message? It's a bit kind of Eight of Wands, and I know that Libby from Crescent Dreams Tarot, they don't like the Eight of Wands because it's what you're supposed to do with that, and I get that and appreciate it. I don't have as much beef with the Eight of Wands as I do the Wheel of Fortune, because I don't know how I would do it better to get that level of movement. I mean, the Chariot, I suppose, is another card that's all about energy and movement and how do you depict that. But yeah, the Wheel of Fortune is the one that I have beef with, which you will know if you have watched a couple of my previous videos where I've gone on at length, because it's my birth card, it's my, it comes up a lot for me, and I just don't really know what to do with it, and I'm sure some people with more esoteric knowledge than me would be able to give me more to go with, to go on with this kind of stuff. I love astrology, and I like that they're all reading, and in this one I really love, the decks I'm using are the Goddess of Love Tarot, the Universal Waite, and the Tarot of the Divine. I love that this is a she in the gig. It makes me smile every time this card comes out, even though the cards kind of annoy me. And then I like that it's the Ouroboros and the kind of patchworky, not patchwork, what do I mean, scrapbooky collage style of the animals and stuff. But I think so many decks just show you a wheel, and that tells you fuck all about how to manage it, or how to read it. And I think that for beginners that must be quite hard, because it's just particularly if you start off with something like a Smith Waite, so many of the cards give you so many clues about where to go with it and what to do with it and kind of how that sort of thing might show up in your life. This, I don't know if that's so obvious. Now, the Tarot of the Divine is really great, and again, I've probably talked about this before, because each of the cards is a story from folklore, myths and legends from around the world, and the Wheel of Fortune is depicted by this spider god, and there's a lot of depth going on with the different fabrics and stuff which have meanings that are not coming to me right now. But his story and kind of things that evoke stuff about like weaving the web of fate. So I have seen like the Fates or the Norns from Norse mythology put on the Wheel of Fortune, and I think that gives you a little bit more to go on. And so this is a card that I do always check. It's not a deal breaker card for me because, like I say, I probably couldn't do it any better, but it is one that I always check. Actually, while we're on circles that don't necessarily give you an awful lot to work with, I am going to briefly touch on the world, because this is another one in the same kind of vein as the Wheel of Fortune, that it's not a deal breaker for me in a deck, but I do like to see what they do with it. And this like circle thing, again, I get it, but like I wish there was more of a distinction between the two, because I mean, you've even got like the astrological stuff going on here. You've got I think this is like all of the different ways that they've shown the elements. And you know, that's great for the completion side of it, but I don't really know what about the world is making it really clear to a querent that it's the completion of something or the end of one journey and the beginning of another. And like, I sort of wish like maybe that it would have some other like additional imagery that, and I mean, all of the decks that I'm using are Smith-Waite based decks, or you know, a full-on clone. I know that in other styles of decks, whether that be Thoth, whether that be Marseille, there's other symbolism at play and like different meanings for cards, and things are a little bit more esoteric, and you don't necessarily want things smack dab front and centre of the card. But I think it can be really helpful, or if you're reading for somebody else, if there's just a little bit more of the imagery to point at and to say, oh, well, obviously this means kind of completion, or as you can see here. So, I mean, I suppose like as you can see here, this person is like stepping through this kind of portally type thing, and then it's like the different elements and stuff. But I would like maybe some kind of allusion to the Fool or the journey they've been on, or something like that. I love the artwork, I do, but it's, you know, it's what I would like for and what I check for when I'm looking at buying a new deck. So again, here we have the story that the Tarot the Divine has used is, I think it's sort of like a little bit of a Romeo and Juliet sort of situation, but with a better ending and more like autonomy on their parts, and they're like a little bit less wet. And so this is like the end of their story, because their story is like the trials and tribulations of them being together, but then it's like their life together will be the next chapter. And so I like that, because it's the story is, and again, because I know the story that's in the card, that gives me more to work with. I don't know if you just had this image to intuitively pull from, whether that would tell you that it's like the end of one thing and the beginning of another. But yeah, just while I was on the subject, so I don't, you know, I'm not being too mean to like just the Wheel of Fortune. The world also gets, you know, a little bit of a sideways glance from me. Speaking of endings, and I'm pretty sure this was in Sylvie's video, or certainly the death card was, because I think a lot of tarot readers have opinions about the death card. And while I'm talking about death, I wanted to pull out the Ten of Swords as well, because I think they have quite similar feelings. And I don't know, like I sort of equate the two of them, and I also think that in a reading, obviously they mean different things, and sort of death is that more like archetypal big picture stuff, whereas Ten of Swords is like a smaller ending, but like the drama is there. I suppose I could have pulled the Tower or something, and I do check the Tower when I'm buying a deck, because sometimes people go all like fairies and rainbows with it and it's a little bit baffling. But I like the death cards, and I'm going to show you. I like the death cards to be dark. Okay, I'm okay with some transformation or rebirth or resurrection or transmutation or metamorphosis or that kind of stuff. But I think it takes something away from the cyclical things, parts of the deck where it's all about death and rebirth and death and rebirth and death and rebirth, because life is all about that. I think it takes something away if you totally remove all of the darkness from a deck. And so I'm going to show you a version of a death card from a deck that I was quite excited, like quite early on in my tarot journey. I found it secondhand. I was quite excited to have a different kind of deck to play with. And there was so much beautiful imagery in the deck. But this was the death card. And I just couldn't deal with it. I just thought it's so happy. I don't know what's going on with like everything that's happening there. Like, I was just, how can you have that be your death card? So like, I like this because we've got actual skulls and, you know, a god or goddess or whatever that's, you know, collected people's heads, but you know, they've been beheaded, and so it's this kind of death and rebirth thing. And you know, obviously you've got your classic death stops for no one. I like the king being trampled. I like the, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And I like, you know, we've got our nod to, and then a new day will dawn. And then here I can't remember what the story is for this one, but it's, you know, it's not shying away. It's got a big skull on it. You know, it's enough to frighten a queer interview to have to jump in and be like, well, you know, it's a metaphorical death. It's not actually saying that you're going to die. And then the same with the Ten of Swords. In this colouring, you've got a really obvious, like, sunrise thing. But this person, it's not, like, gory or anything. We'll get to gore in a second. But it's really final. It's really like, this is it. And I've talked before about how, like, part of my reading of the Ten of Swords is that it's almost like overkill. That it's like, drama queen, get your shit together, let's move on to the next thing. You're done, it's over, let's move on. Not in a really brutal way. Well, maybe in a bit of a brutal way, but just in a, yeah, like, draw a line under it. We'll move on to the next thing. And so this one is like, it's a bit more like pippish. It doesn't necessarily give you loads to work with, but you know, you've got the yellow of a sort of like sunnish thing. You've got the body, like death, spine, ribs and stuff, and you've got like carrion birds. And so I think that is, given that it's got like the pink and fluffy background, it gets the sentient imagery across, I think. And then this one is hilarious because I'll pull this because I use this deck for professional readings. I'll pull this one, and even more so than the death card, does this one feel like something that you need to immediately jump in with and go like, okay, it's not as bad as it looks, I promise. Because this is like someone fell in the river, and then like, I think it's like their father or something like cuts off their fingers as they're trying to get back in the boat. And that's not totally a Ten of Swords moment for me. That's just like, I don't know, what would that be? I mean, that could be like the most brutal sort of Seven of Swords or Seven of Wands or something, but like, I don't personally, I don't know, it's really dark. So yeah, so I check these ones out to see whether they've gone too fluffy or whether they've gone like too dark, which I didn't really think was possible. I'm not super into like horror or gory decks in particular, because I find them a little bit one note. But yeah, this one always makes me laugh because it's like, oh, no need to worry about it being too fluffy. Okay, I'll try and keep this one a little bit brief because this is entirely like, I don't know, in like which tube it would be PG, unverified personal gnosis, but it's just like my opinion and my reading of the card, and because I really like this card and I see a lot of myself in this card, I don't like the person to look stressed in the Hanged one. I'll turn them all upside down so maybe you can see the face a little bit better, because in my head this is a choice. This isn't like, they've not been strung up there by somebody else. This isn't a punishment. They've like chosen to remove themselves. It's sort of like a version of the Hermit, but it's like less intellectual, maybe more like spiritual or kind of emotional, or like taking a breather. That's sort of my personal read on it. And sometimes it obviously it has like the sacrifice elements to it and all of that, and it depends on the reading and the context and stuff, but I like them to look quite serene. I mean, maybe it's a bit weird for them to look happy. I do have a couple of decks where they look like absolutely thrilled, and again that can kind of flatten it oddly. But I don't love them looking like distressed. So here we have like 3 people. I'm pretty sure this is no, it can't be Rapunzel. Is it Sleeping Beauty or like Briar Rose? That would make sense. And so obviously that's like being done to her in the story, but she still looks quite peaceful. So if you're doing a reading and this one comes up, because again the name sounds stressful, but you can like point at their face and be like, look, they're fine, they're chill, they've chosen to be up there. They're just like, I always think of it like hanging upside down on monkey bars more than anything else. And like they look quite at one with the elements and things, and so like that's how I prefer those ones. Through this, my next one is the Lovers card, which I think is the card that Sylvie chose to like name the video of don't judge a deck by its lovers, which I thought was a very, very lovely name. No pun intended. But I'm also chucking into the mix the 2 of Cups and the 4 of... Okay, let's see if I can get... Can I get 3 cards? Yeah, that'll do. Okay, so because I think that I have like similar questions about all of these ones. And like how they are portrayed, because they're all the ones that are kind of about like love, I suppose. And if you've watched my A New Way to Do Love Readings video or read the blog post or anything like that, you'll know that I wish that society didn't put so much pressure on romantic relationships and like monogamous partnered romantic relationships, particularly if there's additional pressure on those relationships to go on to like get married and have kids and buy a house and do all of those traditional things. I suppose I could have like the 10 of Cups in here as well, even 10 of Pentacles, I suppose, to a point. Like these are traditional archetypes of like what happens in a life, and so I like to see what different decks do with these things. There are some amazing queer artists out there who have done really, really beautiful interpretations. The Fyodor Pavlov one particularly springs to mind. There's the Tarot of the Next World, or the Next World Tarot, which also has a really beautiful one. I think it's the Numinous Tarot also has really beautiful ones, which kind of have slightly different, or their own slant on things. But yeah, I like, again, it's not a deal breaker if decks have like a classic representation, because I understand, but I still like to look. And so the Goddess of Love Tarot is quite pippish, and so it's not so cut and dry as to like what it is that it's depicting. So I quite like the way that you've got the two bodies, but they're headless. You can only really see the anatomy of like bits of each body, and so they could be anyone. You've got your two goblets, and you've got some mouths, I think. And then the Tower of the Divine has this gorgeous couple, and I'm thrilled to have in my deck. The marriage ones, or kind of the Four of Wands celebratory things, I again find like a little bit one note to have it depict a wedding. And again, like it's sort of the opposite of when a really bad card comes up. Sometimes if the Four of Wands comes up and you're just like, oh, it doesn't necessarily mean you're about to get married. I don't know, do you want to get married? Is that something that's on the cards? But like, you know, don't read too much into it too quickly, kind of thing. And so I like in this one where it's sort of I don't know, you could sort of start thinking about kind of a utopian community type thing with the city in the clouds, but then also you've got the kind of more pippish wands, fire kind of thing that you can follow as well. And then with the lovers, you've got Beauty and the Beast, which is like an interesting choice for lovers, I think. You know, there are people that talk about Belle having like Stockholm syndrome and all of those sorts of things where it's, you know, pathologising stories, and it's maybe not the most constructive thing to do with that kind of knowledge, but it's still, you know, it raises questions. And then here we've got like, I don't know, some goddess and a mad creature, and you've got more goblets and the moon and the sun and the stars, and I don't know, it almost looks a bit kind of uterusy or like bloody or something. And so that's a really interesting way of doing it. So yeah, I don't have any things that like I hate to see in a lover's card, but I do love seeing if people can do something a little bit different with them. I don't know if I'm making sense. I've had so many interruptions that I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Okay, this is another one which is, you know, unverifiable personal gnosis. Personally a little bit squeamish about the pregnant empress, but I also understand that for people who can get pregnant, want to get pregnant, have been pregnant, seeing someone like that in the tarot is kind of your one opportunity often. And so I don't begrudge a pregnant empress. I don't know if I have any in any of the decks that I have, because I have some like personal baggage around like femininity that I'm working through. So in the past I may well have just discounted decks purely based on that. But yeah, I like there to be stuff about growing in more than just the kind of growing another person sense. I like there to be stuff about creativity, or yeah, that kind of active creation beyond creating a person, which again, I feel like I really need to drive this point home. I obviously have no, or I hope it's obvious, I have no issue with the act of creating a new human. That is how we are all here. It's like personal issues with like linking that with so intrinsically with femininity that, you know, it's personal baggage, it's on me, it's not on you. No judgment here at all. This is a silly video about tarot cards. I do like a bit of kind of Aphrodite type stuff, or, you know, Venus or any of that kind of thing. I really like, this is Our Lady of Guadalupe, I think, so kind of a bit of Mary thrown in, I think is quite nice, but I can also see it is like quite alienating to some, and we will, trust me, we will get to that. But yeah, this was just another one of my like person, like the Hanged Man putting himself there. It's just like, in my head, the Empress uses a wheelchair, and so I quite like that. So, speaking of religious trauma, we have the two, like, I suppose, like, big daddies of tarot, and I know that lots of people have difficulties with both of these. These are definitely cards that I like to check out. I suppose probably the Hierophant more than the Emperor, but not by much. This is one of my favourite Hierophant cards I've ever seen, which is from the Tarot of the Divine, and it's like, it's much more that like ancestral wisdom and tradition rather than institution tradition, to me, to my mind. The Goddess of Love Tarot has taken like a bit of a slant on it, because this is like all to do with like sacred sex and the sacred erotic. And then the Emperor, yeah, I mean, I think, because this is King Arthur, and I think that's like a good thing if you know anything about King Arthur, because he was like more along the sort of like just fair king, because, you know, fairy stories, and that's not fairy stories, but myths and legends, and that's what remains. I'm sure he was also a bellend in his own right, but what remains is the kind of the justness and the fairness and the kind of the questing, fun, simplified version of what it means to be a king. And so, like, I think lots of people have issues with these cards of the hierarchical thing and the masculinity thing and the boundaries and the structure and the kind of Saturn, Zeus type figures. So they're always ones to like check out for me. Right, we're on to the last two cards that I have opinions about. Well, no, as I'm sure with many of you, I have opinions about all of the cards, but these are just the ones that I make a beeline for in a deck. So we've got the Six of Coins, which I think both Sylvie and Libby mentioned in their videos. I don't love it to look hierarchical. I would prefer it to be lateral. Or this Six of Coins from Tarot of the Divine is more like she gave more than she should have done. So she gave like her last crumbs to these other creatures, and so she died. Like, it's like, I suppose, a little bit like their version of the Ten of Swords. It's like more dramatic than I would usually go, and it takes like a different spin on the card. But yeah, like this, they're kind of like, oh, look at me, important merchant, giving away my goods to these poor, feeble humans who have no money and just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. You know, not so big on that. But this, you know, this person has like, they've got their jewels on, they're like taking receipt of something. There's, you know, there's an element of this kind of fairness, balance thing of the sixes. But yeah, it's less, look at me being a do-gooder. I suppose I'm just a little bit more of the eat the rich persuasion, and so I prefer things to look a bit more mutual or lateral or that kind of stuff. And then our last one is the Nine of Swords, which is one of my cards, and I don't have any issues with the traditional depiction of it, and I don't have any issues with either of these. This probably is my main deal breaker vibe check card. It's probably not one that I would think to look for first, but when I think about it now, it is probably the card, because I have seen too many versions of this card that are along the kind of asylum kind of thing, and I just, no, I don't want that. I mean, I've had, you know, I have personal stuff around that in terms of like mental health, but I also just think that, like, because it's never done delicately, you know, it's always like, whoa, it's like the Joker, like insane asylum bedlam, kind of lock them up, they're all mad, kind of stuff, which I mean, there's absolutely no place for in my tarot practice, all my life, and I don't think there really necessarily should be in anyone's, but that's, again, my feelings. I really like this Nine of Swords. This is like the Oracle of Delphi. It's like bad news, having to share bad news, you know, visions, dreams, nightmares. I think comes into that, and I think it's Oedipus. I think that's the story that's being depicted, and so it's like prophecy as well. It's like really interesting. And you know, this is kind of pippish and fine and doesn't have anything dreadful in it. And so yeah, so that's just my like my two maybe slightly more like political-esque things of where I please don't do anything weird with those last two cards. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you sticking with me. Please let me know the cards that you look for, the cards, you know, like what's like the weirdest or worst version of a thing that you've seen in a deck that you were thinking about buying. I'm super interested. As always, I hope you're taking really good care of yourself, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!